one must always be aware of their frame of reference. There's no science that does not begin at a certain point and end at a certain point. There's no logic involved when you're lost and you have no frame of reference. You cannot measure anything. For someone, regardless of technical expertise, who is not versed in the schools of sovereignties, humanities, to judge someone else for their practicality, fools despise wisdom and instruction. My generation was desensitized to theological speak because our exposure to it was the Sufis. Operation Desert Storm, they would show some footage of a cleric with a massive beard and dressed all in black and gesturing at the sky, allegedly preaching angrily on the evils of women. And then 3 generals would walk out in front of the pulpit and say, "All right, these are the guys we're going to bomb. See you later." Now to this day, you got to be careful what you profess to believe in. The Bible has certain guidelines on how you should worship, but it's not a sin to witness a miracle, for instance. A miracle is something that doesn't really matter if you believe it. It's not bragging rights, and take it for what you will. You think I'm crazy because I witnessed a miracle? That's no way to go about finding out what else I know. More importantly, these people have been conditioned to find fault in the logic and practicality and authenticity of a book they have never read, as pretense for never reading it. Socrates was a theist. Solomon, the wisest judge in antiquity, spent most of his free time composing psalms to God. But, clearly his primitive intellect was no match for the Xbox Live generation. It sounds radical. It sounds, it sounds a little rabid to say that we owe the Nazis for this. But in fact, if you dedicated any time to understanding the delineation, what really sets the Nazis aside apart from a traditional military force, be it volunteer or otherwise, their ethical approach, not only to war, but to interrogation, research, would not have been tolerated had any civilization been privy to it at the time. This is how the Protestants work. The end of World War II, we had 2 nuclear devices. One for Germany, one for Japan. After Nuremberg, the Nazi scientists who had spent their last few years dosing wrongfully interred religious minorities with various chemicals and subjecting them to extremes of exposure and torture were repatriated. Somebody thought they deserved a second chance. Why? Well, don't say anything. But here's what we're going to do with Japan. We're going to bring the Nazis here. We're going to say it was Argentina, so we don't get a bunch of flack about it right away. And then we're going to give Japan both devices. Just because fuck it. Don't worry, Japan. We're not gonna prosecute you for war crimes in Nanjing because the scientific contribution you made was too valuable. We couldn't have learned this otherwise without committing atrocities. So they brought the Nazis in. They bombed Japan twice. They gave Japan the Nazi punishment as well as the empire. This is a typical Protestant practice where you punish the neighbor's child twice and spare your own. Protestant countries tend to reject a state religion. And that is so they're free to practice Islam while pretending to be Christians. I know it's hard to believe if you never researched it, but Charlemagne, son of Charles Martel, halted the Saracen advance at France. Charlemagne used a greeting, just a social letter from the Vatican, misrepresented himself and the letter as a holy writ, claimed to be on a mandate for the church, and by deception and brute force stole the land which belonged to the heirs of the Romans in the Rhine River Valley, claimed it on behalf of the tribespeople of the Black Forest, united Germany, and then the Saracens of France joined Germany. The Saracens of Gaul, I should say, joined Germany, adopted the name of Franks, became France. France, at best, has always been a crossroads for actual civilization. At various times it has taken on the appearance of a sovereignty, but it's the social mechanic of France is a crossroads with a carnival for all its riches, its cultural contributions. It's a monument to transience. If you never look outside of your own little shell in the world, you can't tell someone who's never been in there what the outside of it was like. So the KKK doesn't think they're Muslim. In fact, this is a cult which thrives alongside Islam because, for all its conversion by the sword, torture, imperialism, sadism, Islam has always existed side by side by the Yentl. So, if a cult of, for instance, Zoroastrian magi turned up and didn't cause a problem, they wouldn't have been treated any differently from any other Bedouin. But if you say to a devout Muslim that France is a Muslim country, they might disagree with you. Even though the Muslim population of France is not a decisive majority, but a majority segment of the population. The country geopolitically lends itself to Islam more easily than Christianity. Christianity is work. Christianity takes effort. Don't mistake my intent. What I propose is just that we acknowledge that France is not a Christian country. It's important because even though you've been conditioned for generations, centuries, to think that this is all Christianity, in fact, Christianity in practice creates the culture of liberty, security, justice. It's with liberty and justice for all. Nobody promised you the truth, but when things are working properly, you should be able to buy it. This allows authority to function beyond the perception of the layman. And what this authority is allowed to do falls into one of a few categories, but not in France. Culturally speaking, and geopolitically, France separates Germany from Spain and is like a cultural highway from Libya to Britannia. Germany is a large region. It borders on Poland. It's within reach of all the Viking Nordic countries. Russia is spitting distance. It's actually harder to get to Italy from Germany than it is to get to Russia. Spain is cut off by the Pyrenees, and these are a significant natural barrier. But the Saracens got through, and they stopped for some reason. They stopped here at this crossroads with Lombardy and what was not yet Germany, would have been Bavaria or Austria, Vienna. All these kingdoms all these realms within reach, and they stop and allow Charles Martel to handle things. So his son Charlemagne united the Black Forest with the Rhine River Valley. How did he do that? He did it by defrauding and strong-arming and slaying the heirs of the Roman land deeds. He basically, it was like a persecution or a holy war, a crusade against Rome, well, against the descendants of Rome, the rightful owners of the Rhine River Valley. So he gave the Roman lands to the denizens of the Black Forest, and then was joined by the Muslim Saracen army from France and Gaul. The Holy Roman Empire, established by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day in 800 CE. It was neither holy nor Roman. It was an undulating wilderness of barbarian chiefs. And it probably spelled the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. Rome and Vatican City were under the protection of the Greek coin Byzantium Empire for 1,000 years. Charlemagne and his Holy Roman Empire, when they weren't scrimmaging with other barbarians, were attacking Catholic kingdoms like Poland. They managed to fight their way south through Lombardy, Tuscany, and finally touch Rome. Finally claimed protectorate with the Vatican, and then it fell apart. About 200 years after that, the Byzantine Empire fell. About within a century after that, the Ottoman Empire rose in its place. Around the same time that the Eastern Roman Empire fell, the Renaissance began shortly after that. The printing press was invented at Gutenberg. The Protestant Reformation was initiated at Wittenberg. It only took people a couple decades to realize, now that I can read this, I don't know why these priests are doing the stuff they're doing. It didn't occur to them that the Holy Roman Empire was never a Catholic institution, not even close to Christian. The only thing consecrated about it was the fraud that they perpetrated against the church, which forced Leo to recognize Charlemagne as a sovereign, a monarch, a König. But maybe Leo was a traitor. I find it kind of hard to reconcile, but this is conjecture. At any rate, coronating this barbarian after he perpetrated these crimes against Rome and the church probably significantly contributed to the downfall of the Eastern Roman Empire and the rise of the Ottoman Empire. No problem for the Protestants. They're fine with that because they've never been subject to the church. They went from 600 years of Holy Roman Empire, which we've established was Islam, to 400 years of nothing, because Poland had been driven back. They were having problems with Moscow, 1000 CE, the schism between East and West. So the Protestants were protesting their own church. It just happened to look like the Catholic Church. Now Christendom is beset by white, carny Muslims who think they can tell us how we fail as Christians, as if there's some role in the Bible that they read. Now that they could read it for themselves, it was their responsibility to persecute everybody. It's not in there. That's Islam. That's cultural. It comes from your society. But France isn't a real country. How come everybody loves it so much? Because France is what if your country was like a rogue state naturally, if that was how it's supposed to be, France is like the inverse of a country. It's like a black market. It's like going to the mall and buying diamonds that were stolen from Africa. They blame the Jews for everything. Right off the bat, first answer is always the Jews did it. Where'd you get these diamonds? The Jews. Well, how come the people digging for them got their hands cut off? The Muslims. You are the Muslims. Well, what's the big difference between Islam and Christianity? Supposedly they're both derived from Judaism. They're all Abrahamic religions, except for the Covenant of Israel. There's but one Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. So you're supposed to be required to establish direct lineage from Muhammad in order to serve as the monarch. But by the time you kill enough people to establish that, don't know better than to ask. Christianity is an anthology, a compendium. It's a library that was written and compiled by people from all walks of life around the time, over a few centuries. Judaism is it's compiled of traditions older than ancient Greece, gathered from all over, beyond the limits of the known world. This is Judeo-Christian culture. The Jews are patiently and intently waiting for their Savior, observing ancient purification rituals. It's the mainstay of Judaism is purification. Christians, on the other hand, they await the return of their Savior, when we will get all our purification done at once. In the meantime, we dwell in a state of holy war, spiritual warfare. It's not some mental ESP combat. Very real. It has to do with ethics and values and society, prisons, police, politics. like France, like Islam. You can call it whatever you want for as long as you're able to call it that. But in order for us to acknowledge it, it has to work. It has to make sense some way or another. You might look at the Bible and say, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, that contradicts that. But you're reading it wrong. You say you gotta have a little faith. I don't know if it's blasphemy to say that you have to read it to understand it. The wicked flee when none pursueth, but the righteous are bold as lions. That's good stuff. Most importantly, in matters of holy war, I will be judged by my Creator. I know that. It's not subject to your interpretation. You shall know them by their fruits. You couldn't find my fruit if it came up and bit you. I never learned to, never found a reason to love this life. In this world, not of it. I go hard. It really doesn't matter what you may have thought you perceived. Because, for one thing, that is subject to misinterpretation. For another, your frame of reference is established as false. Nazis are a tribe of magi. They think, and it's like a form of Moloch worship, where they divide the wheat from the chaff in racial terms, as if they never heard of circumcision. Why would the Jews have circumcised if they all had to be homogenous? If they were all the same color, why bother? You could just tell the corpse was Jewish. The idea of separating human wheat from human chaff, as opposed to ye shall know them by their fruits, is a form of Moloch worship. The Moloch is a monster, scary, and he will attack your scalp if it isn't covered. And I don't know if it's a form of sunstroke, but these people think that if they don't poison, cripple, and isolate, marginalize, imprison, and kill the mixed kids, subject of interbreeding between the races, that they're hungry, stupid demon, god, whatever, will come and gobble up their scalps. I wish I were speaking metaphorically. In fact, that's pretty close. The Jews all wear one. Yep, don't worry about me. The Muslims, the Pope wears one because it's a real thing. It's a common, people out there see it. But these people claim to be Christian, and it makes those truly faithful pretty angry. But we're compelled to tolerate until our Lord and Savior returns, figures it out himself. In the meantime, this vast region of barbarian tribes dressing like monks, priests, abusing Catholic institutions such as indulgences, misrepresenting the church for profit because nobody would listen to them otherwise. They used to have to raid your village to take you for everything you had. Now you bring it to them. So in the 15th century, the world received the printing press, which allowed mass production of the Bible. Shortly after that, Luther's 99 Theses, the Protestant Reformation. At the same time, with the fall of the Greek coin empire, Byzantium, in the interim between that, while the Eastern Muslims were just tentatively exploring new trade routes with Vienna, no, Venice. It triggered a renaissance of ancient Greek thought. These people, it's come full circle. So it calls it Golden Age because this was culturally familiar. It fit right in. This is where we come from. Not so much for the Vikings. We're instructed not to judge, to presume no one is beyond redemption. But let's face it, Rome didn't get to everybody in time. So, one common thread of all schools of Christianity and Judaism is, and even Islam, is baptismal. But the thing is, Judaism grooms you from early childhood to become a good Jew. Just like any other faith, once you're an adult, God's first blessing is free will. You can be a bad Jew if you want. The thing is, a lot of magi come from the fringes of any religion, but more commonly, they are recognized, they stand out when they happen to come from the Near East. So, Europeans learn to blame the Jew, even though the Pale of Settlement was just a small segment of the population, kept to themselves, conducted business. They weren't amassing vast fortunes. They were just purist in their way of living, not to be confused with puritanical. They were purists. So when these Western magi, their society had run its course, as it is wont to do, it's not built to last, it's not sustainable, it's not even logical. The Jews took the heat because it happens every time. When your empire falls, the guys who weren't playing still have some chips on the table. Why? They're not participating in the relentless expansion of empire. But no religion is without its magi. And when someone adopts a resentment of the holy and takes on a visage of, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And, you know, I've studied this, you know, casually, naturally, passively, since I was just a tyke. So I joke around a little bit. Say things like, I do what I want. You ain't the boss of me. That's funny, because I was in the army. There's no basis for that bullshit. But we all regard that as Satanism. We understand it as Satanism. And those who are familiar, at least a little bit, with alchemy, equate that with Satanism, because alchemy is the common thread of the Magi. For better or worse, the Magi isn't necessarily here to conquest, lay waste to your village, defile your daughters and your sons, leave with everything you had. Magi aren't necessarily here to poison the well and sell you the cure, but they've been known to do that. And the common thread is not just the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone would have been what the state alchemists, when they rose to power, established a hierarchy, they would have said, all right, well, we're still working on the whole how to make gold thing. But the Greeks saw it for what it was, and they said, we're going to pass on that. And they invented the Republic. Well, standardized the Republic. And from there, their intellectual pursuits, innovation, flourished. And they defined aspects of society we take for granted now. But because we take them for granted, we're susceptible to the usurper, collapse from within. If we don't learn to recognize when something is missing or broken, then that inability to adapt will lead to our downfall. And whether or not you consider America an empire, because you've been conditioned to think all empires are bad, it still requires certain fundamental contributing factors to sustain. Even if it's stasis, entropy, it's a living, breathing thing. It's a superorganism. It doesn't have to be bloodthirsty and relentlessly ambitious, expanding. But it does need to contract. It has to expand and contract like any living thing. There has to be some give and take. You can't just build and build and build. Claim you're not an empire, thereby binding your own hands and what you're able to do with that. And then these people, and we call them the KKK. In fact, just being a Protestant doesn't necessarily qualify you as a hooded terrorist magi. But, you know, what have you done lately? They claim to be Baptist too. Jesus was a Baptist. Who's your pastor? Some guy with a hood. He's a wizard. I'm a dragon. So you can understand why the Greeks had enough of that 5,000 years ago. The Norsemen aren't without their virtues, right? When they're not, raping priests and eating people. We got the Christmas tree from the Norsemen, which may or may not represent the sacrifice of Socrates, in my opinion. Separation of church and state, Socrates. Not just the solar system. The Senate is tasked with interpreting the will of the gods, which was basically the standardization of scientific practice. There wasn't scientific method yet, but there was enough debate that they were pretty sure of what they were talking about by the time it was ratified. It wasn't one guy hiding out in a cave in the middle of a war zone, writing down what he remembered. What he remembered of a compendium written by 100 generations of prophets and mystics, trade princes, high priests. One guy. And pirates would capture Christians. They called white people Christians. We called our ancestors thought that all brownies were Muslim because they were constantly engaged in holy war, while the Turk traded medicine and science, art with Venice. The Barbers kidnapped Irish and French from the North Sea to as far south as I don't know of any reports of them capturing Spanish so much. Spanish was occupied too, that's why it led to the Inquisition, but the French Inquisition was not as successful because, once again, it was conducted by the Muslims. Anyway, these Barbary corsairs would take my cousins, the Celts from Ireland, Britain, Cornwall, which has nothing to do with walls. Anyway, all over Northern Europe, they would capture them, they would take them back to North Africa, and they would be rewarded. They would collect a bounty from the Caliph. The Caliph collected white slaves. Some people think white slavery refers to the sex trade. It has nothing to do with race. I consider, in my own studies, white slavery appears to be state-sanctioned slavery, as opposed to black market slavery. But it's easy enough to understand why people would get that confused, because the caliphs, the caliphate, called us white gold. The cross was not. It's not patented. There's no copyright. Muslims nail you to a cross. Not so much the Jews, but Rome is like their calling card. Romania took it a step further. Vlad the Impaler. There were corpses on sticks would litter the countryside. It was a billboard. Whatever little feudal kingdom coming up on the left here, don't miss your exit. You know this guy? Friend of yours, Muhammad? When they started having problems with Magi, they would just start just blaming people. It must be this guy. Let's kill him and see if it stops. When your city guard are corrupted, when cowards find their way into your defenses, you are all guilty. Anyone but them. So these people call themselves Christians while they bank on corruption. They need guarantees of corruption so that their little scam will work. And this makes them feel like biggest dickies. They will take one of your sons, rob him, and make it look like another one. And then they will sacrifice both of them and keep both shares. But in a Christian realm, in Christendom, these prisons belong, and this is just rational logic, they either belong to a sovereign royal or to the democracy. So you appear to be a king. Just want to establish that France is a Muslim country and the Protestant church is not a Christian one. Neither is the evangelical church. There's no such thing as wholesale Christianity. If your pastor does not recognize you from Adam, you are not a member of his flock. In Christianity, everybody belongs to somebody. You can watch a false prophet on TV, even send him money all you want. After Rome lost their western armies, there were 2 waves of persecution, 2 centuries apart, coinciding with the councils of Nicaea, where they wiped out the heretics. The people who lived in the Near East at the time believed themselves to be Baptists. In fact, they made a stronger argument for it. I'm Baptist myself, but could have used a little more. But look at the Russians. If you're a Russian Christian, you know you were baptized. But it's a function of Judeo-Christianity and Islam. The difference is that Islam grooms you from a child. Judaism grooms you from childhood to become a Jew. They don't say that you're born a Jew. You have to recite the Torah. You have to sing it. There's a bris and a bar mitzvah and all that. It's all very ritualistic, and it's a rite of passage. Christianity is not it's not something that you give somebody. They'll christen their babies to set them aside for the Lord, but the babies are not. They haven't repented. They might practice confession. They still don't know sin. They're not sorry. They can't be sincerely a warrior for Christ yet. Hopefully they will eventually. But most of these people are not Christians. You have to repent. You have to be truly, genuinely remorseful. Honestly, when someone sets you up and you don't know why, and you always presume the best in people, it had to be your fault. And you can spend 20 years trying to figure out what you did, and then one day come to find out it was a misunderstanding. old man. So maybe I'm not a Christian, because I ain't sorry. Islam. Islam will convert you by the sword. Islam will capture you from your little fishing village, take you back to North Africa, force you to accept Islam. They'll beat the soles of your feet with a cane until you cannot walk, or you swear upon your immortal soul that there is but one Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. Not Daniel, not David, not Israel, not Abraham, not Moshe, not Solomon. Just Mo. Congratulations, you're Muslim. Don't die. That's all there is to it. We got him. No. You want to be a Christian, you come to the church and you come sorry. You come scared. You come with your conscience. Because if you're not sincerely vested, we don't need you. I mean, you can always attend, you can always take communion. But, like I said, the Lord will come decide for himself. And there are varying theories on how exactly he'll do that. I'm partial to the tradition of the Archangel Michael. Archangel Michael, kind of hardcore. The Saint Michael is the patron saint of police. Archangel Michael is the archangel of eternal justice. He doesn't care about your badge. He's not blind. He's got big old white wings, a flaming sword, and scales. Whereas the Egyptian Maat would weigh your heart against a feather, which is an impossible odds. Meaning you're all damned anyway. May as well do what you want. Michael, instead, weighs your heart against your deeds. So, whether or not this was you, whether you did it or not, you will be judged for eternity upon your intent. I kind of relish the idea of all these normie zombies watching an archangel weigh their hearts. Most importantly, in their wholesale rejection of the Roman Catholic Church as well as the Eastern Orthodox Church, to include the Ethiopian Coptic Church, the Protestants, while they in the case of Denmark profess atheism, in fact are just non-practicing pagans. They are wide open to Islam and Magi because they're not engaged in holy war. They don't take it seriously, and they're susceptible, and they're fearful, and they think they're already Christians. What more is there to do? Well, obviously it's a big hoax, right? This is what it really means. Might makes right. No. We don't cull the weak. We don't oppress women. We don't persecute. We don't steal land deeds from Roman inheritors and then burn their widows as witches. The Inquisition, because Islam was allowed to mix in Europe for hundreds of years unchecked. It's still going strong in France. I'm proud of it. Why wouldn't they be? It's a carnival. They have the Louvre, they have the Eiffel Tower, they have all these monuments to what a legitimate country they are. Napoleon, what a great strategist, what a general, with his unlimited supply of ammunition from North Africa. He instructed his troops to hide before an ambush. Mind blown. I'm not a bigot. This isn't hate. This is a man who identifies on a cellular level with his country, watching it fall apart, devoting his life to understanding why. You're conditioned to recognize any criticism of race, creed, etc. as illogical, irrational hatred. In fact, I tell you that if there were any place for racism in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there would be no reason for all of us to be circumcised. There is no argument for segregating black and white based on wheat and chaff. I am the way, the truth, and the life. None come to the Father but through me. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Not ye shall know white people. So you understand, the Roman Church ain't paying for that. It's open to all. Fundamentally, at its core, the ideal of the church is openness to all, because Rome was more than willing to conquer all. And this is an act of atonement. So, Catholics might act, not as reserved about their sociological judgments as others might think they should be. But in fact, they're not leaving their neighborhood to go and hunt you down. They're just looking after their flock, their family, their community. If you belong, you belong. You might be the exception. You have to put up with some bullshit, but everybody belongs to somebody. It's not irrational. It's just not inhibited. If you want persecution, see the Muslims or the Vikings. All you can eat. What about the Inquisition? Wheat and chaff. Who was that? Ultimately, Spain returned to righteousness because they had a very clear boundary. Okay, this is us, and that's them. And not only that is them, all of that is them. So we must be us. And to prove it, Queen Isabella, a devout Catholic, sent the heretic Magi defector Columbus to the New World to either establish a trade route for gold, or die. Give us an excuse. Simple diplomacy. Hold it against them all you want, but they're good for it. He didn't die. So, South America it is. When Vasco da Gama reached South America, he was recognized as a god. Why? Not only was his skin made of steel, not only did he have the thunder stick that would end your life from 100 feet away, but the god kings that they had been forced to worship couldn't hold a candle to the conquistadors. The conquistadors wiped out the empires. Hardly a struggle. These empires had been enslaving people, sacrificing virgins along with criminals, willy-nilly. There was no way out of it. There was nothing you could do. The populace were paralyzed with terror. Vasco da Gama was the ultimate liberator. The Catholics assimilated. They took wives and they named their little brown kids after themselves. There's no room for racism in Christianity. On the other hand, North America. The French were trading furs up and down the Mississippi 200 years before the rest of us got here. By the time we got here, 90% of the North American native were wiped out by smallpox. And the survivors, most of them spoke French. As we speak, Royal Canadian Mounted 007 Police turn a blind eye to the wanton rape and murder of Native American women. Ultimately, my purpose is not an indictment. Not as far as you are concerned, dear viewer. I may or may not have accounts to settle on behalf of my country. Nothing personal. It's not an indictment. It is a scientific approach. Logical argument. Protestants are not Christian. And evangelists, especially televangelists, are the opposite of Baptists. You have done us a great disservice with your clown act. Post-McCarthyist, quasi-religious carnival. Now, most of Christendom, their impression of American Christianity is this flagrant barbarism, showmanship. Not an indictment. Jesus will come figure it out. But for those in Washington who take for granted that these people are just worthless and that it's sectarian or secular, the Christians are much more likely to die for their principles than someone accustomed to thinking they're doing the Lord's work by sacrificing other people's children 2 by 2. Some of us are reckless, but like I said, everyone belongs to someone. So someone should have told that zombie apocalypse in Washington, in America, We throw the tea in the harbor. Could you be more Canadian? Just burn down the White House while you're at it, Majesties, my lords. Facebook, prior to suspending my account for 30 days for cursing out the terrorists who attacked the Capitol based on fact. There's no such thing as rational hate speech. If it makes sense, it's not hate. It's fully qualified. Oppressor. America did not fall this far from grace by itself. I've been saying for 20 years, never forget. I didn't know. I didn't know. But yeah, now that I know, I was there. I didn't know what I was looking at. But you're not going to tell me that 2 planes knocked down 3 buildings by any scientific. I don't care. I know what I saw. And I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. More so, to the republic for which it stands. A nation indivisible. That means indivisible with means inseparable from. Not indivisible from each other. Indivisible with liberty and justice for all. Not each other. One nation under God. Indivisible with liberty and justice for all. So, these people are not with me. And it may bounce right off. You may not think it's an insult to be called a fascist. You might even think the extreme opposite, that it's preferable to be called a communist. As if, in the end, someone wasn't responsible for bringing home the bacon. Bacon just grows on trees. Fascist, communist, sticks and stones, right? Don't broach the subject of someone's sexual preference, not even if it has nothing to do with their actual sexual preference. That's a protected word. It's not just a protected class. You're not allowed to say that. So, understand that when I call you godless, heathen, carny zombies, that is set to kill. It might not work, but if I could say it any clearer. Hey, Muhammad, do you want these carnies back? Nowhere to go. Upset about our election. Our election was stolen. Not even eligible to vote. I was suspended from Facebook because I said most Trump supporters are conceived, fertilized, and incubated in a test tube, meaning they have no mother, the thought of whom might occur to them seeing their idiot son attacking the fucking Capitol like a godless zombie and then leaving before the relief arrives like it was a field trip. You're a goddamn disgrace. They're not my people. I am so sorry. I'm not Christian enough for you. Someone to come and pick you up? Is there like a boat waiting for you? Build a wall! Build the wall! Niagara to Vancouver.